Hello Internet, Taliesin here, and today we are talking trolls. We are talking dinosaurs. We are talking the second best lower in the history of all things lower, Bwonsamdi, and much against my better judgment, we are going to be talking old gods, and yes, probably for a change, some Lich King as well, because today we are talking the two closing cinematics on the Horde storyline on Zandalar from Battle for Azeroth. Zandalar Forever. A storyline full of action, battles, city-sized monsters, and some pretty questionable deals with kind of the actual devil, because I have now maxed out a Horde character. I have seen it with my own eyes, and I am ready, Internet, to embark upon another Taliesin talks and analyse both the cinematics themselves, the references, imagery, themes and purpose they serve in the story, but also to talk about what all of those things mean for the future of BFA as an expansion and World of Warcraft as a whole, because my oh my, there are plenty of implications and intriguing possibilities that this story presents us with. So, as usual, if you haven't already seen these two cinematics, then this is a terrible way to watch them. We're going to be stopping and starting and talking over bits. This is a dissection of what's going on, and we kind of assume that you've watched them already before we start. And actually, I guess this will be the last Taliesin Talks cinematic analysis for a while, after a huge slew of them all in a row, so you know what? I'm going to enjoy it, and hopefully you will too. So join us as we talk about the ending of the Horde storyline in Zandalar and the two final cinematics, Zandalar Forever, okay? Go, 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 go. So before we jump into the first cinematic, which Blizzard rather matter-of-factly calls Rastakhan's deal with Bwonsamdi, some background on what has happened so far up to this point and how it compares with the Alliance leveling experience. Because as a player, what struck me all the way through playing the two sides of the conflict was how the narratives of the two factions mirrored each other in kind of reverse. So Alliance players start the expansion with their fleet getting destroyed, then Jaina getting arrested, and you thrown in jail, and the next 10 levels of content are about you as a player building everything back up from the ground in a way to the quite triumphant return of Jaina, her reconciliation with Catherine, and the return of the missing Kultiran navy. The Horde trajectory is pretty much the opposite. It starts from a place of triumph. You begin the expansion by rescuing Princess Talanji and Zul, escaping from Stormwind, and also setting Stormwind on fire for good measure. The Zandalari navy blowing the chasing Alliance fleet out of the water, and everything just generally being all big and gold and awesome. But then the next 10 levels for Horde players is essentially everything going to shit, and ending on a very, very different note. In Nazmir, you and Talanji try and take out the Blood Trolls, and just about manage it despite taking heavy losses and letting main baddie Madar Renkala escape. In Vol'dun, you totally fail to stop Yak Rosette from raising the massive and terrifying Mythrax the Unraveller, and that's definitely going to be a problem. And worst of all, in Zuldazar, Zul betrays King Rastakhan, kills the royal lower Razan, and is on the verge of destroying the last seal holding the, well, we call him an old god, but he's only a real old god in the same way that Soylent is real food, old god Gahun captive. So then, after completing each zone's story chapters, you are thrown headfirst into a balls-to-the-wall defense of the Bloodgate against the invading Blood Trolls, and then a full-on assault of Dazar Alor. And, by the way, that means that these three Horde cinematics are much, much easier to see than the Alliance Jaina ones, where you had to do a pretty long quest chain, get items from 3 different dungeons, and complete the mythic-only Siege of Boralis dungeon. This is just the one quest line and a pretty cool scenario with a cinematic at the climax of each. So we begin at the end of the Battle of the Bloodgate. We've just hooked up with Talanji at the end, and even though we won, things are looking bleak. So this opening shot of Talanji surveying the battlefield is really interesting straight away, because it inverses a theme that has been used quite a lot in the BFA cinematics so far, the mist, or the fog of war. And when we've seen it used before, it's been to signify the arrival of a good thing, a saviour even. Jaina arrives through the parting clouds to save the Alliance at the Battle of Lordaeron. The mist parts to reveal the Zandalari fleet, who lay some serious smackdown and save Talanji. The storm clouds part to reveal the Kultiran fleet and foil the invasion of Boralis. Here though, the mist is heavy and present, and it's not going anywhere. We are right in the middle of it, and things are bad. We could really do with some outside force, parting the clouds and saving the day, but unlike in the other cinematics, that isn't going to happen here.
So many lost.
And is there a sadder sound in the world than a sad dinosaur sound? No, there isn't. And the fact that Talanji's mount, Xena, is a gilded Ravasaur made this especially poignant for me, because I don't know about you, but the gilded Ravasaur mount, this exact model, was my mount of choice for my first playthrough of the Horde story. It quite likely was yours too. I saw a lot of them about, and that actually helped make this an unexpectedly personal moment for me. I, of course, also played through the first time as a troll shaman, which you probably didn't, in fairness, but hey.
I know. I miss Razan too.
And Talanji says she misses Razan, the lower of kings who was killed in the build-up, and no shit she misses him. Razan is the power that she would call on to help them out of a mess like this, and who Rastakhan would call on too. Both the members of the royal family are left essentially powerless in the wake of his death, and that helplessness is shown in Talanji's loneliness here. These aren't subjects kneeling, as we might expect, but the injured tending to their wounds, and King Rastakhan's isolation away from them all, without the might of the lower of kings backing them up. There's nothing to separate these two from everyone else aside from their titles and massive hats. Like, really massive hats. I love how visually bright all of this opening is, by the way, which you might not expect from a scene portraying despair and dark times, but clearly the team wanted it to contrast very clearly in tone from what happens next. Because King Rastakhan observes his daughter's sadness with an almost desperation, because she is not just his daughter, she is his heir. If they lose this fight, it's not just Rastakhan that loses the throne, it's Talanji and the rest of his line too. And all really because of some pretty bad decisions he has taken since we've been there. And in his desperation, he decides desperate measures must be taken. And very quickly, something I always find a bit disconcerting about Rastakhan is his gold-plated nose. Because I get it, you know, he's a king. He's going to have a gold-plated nose, because why not? I probably would too. In the Warcraft RPG, he's an alchemist, so maybe he made his own gold nose plating out of lead. Who knows? Who knows? That's all great, but to me, it always looks at first glance like a comedy band-aid over his nose. So to me, he always looks like he's recovering from a beating, which doesn't really make him all that intimidating, to be honest. Luckily, he has his very intimidating hat to even it all out. And we see him performing a ceremony, a lot like the one we see Talanji performing to summon Razan in the opening Horde cinematic. But of course, whereas that one resulted in a swirly blue magic dinosaur of awesomeness, that awesome magic dinosaur is now dead. And so this process involves
the dust of bones for the lower of death.
And like how Talanji's summoning of Razan sent her into something of a trance, like she wasn't quite there, likewise here, Rastakhan is transported in mind to the temple of Bwonsamdi. Now, I said before that Bwonsamdi was the second best lower, and he is, because obviously the best lower is Kragwa, the frog lower, who is so badass that every time he starts jumping about, I'm genuinely scared that the actual game client is going to break. But that aside, can we please have a moment of appreciation for the awesomeness of Bwonsamdi?
Well, this is a surprise.
As a character, as a presence in the game, and as a vocal performance from Alex Desert. And yes, I know his name is almost certainly pronounced Desert, but to me his voice is just so smooth and yummy and basically makes my heart melt like a salt chocolate pudding, so he will always be dessert to me, okay? There is basically nothing I don't like about Bwonsamdi. I love that he has different jokes to say to different classes when they die. I love that he's a truly chaotic neutral character in a way that we don't often see. Certainly not in WoW. I love how Blizz took the charming crudeness of the Haitian lower of death Baron Samedi and just totally ran with it. I love the design of his model with its ever so slight nod to Ner'zhul, the original Lich King. But most of all, I love how important he is and the intrigue that surrounds something that he says later on. Because this guy is brilliant, but he's bad news. And here we see him in a clear position of power over King Rastakhan, towering above him from a high vantage point and sitting in the actual torch that lights the room. He is the king's last beacon of hope. Bwonsamdi holds all the cards here and he knows it, which just adds to his cocky bravado in this scene, and it's brilliant.
You're looking pretty good, Your Majesty.
As are you, Brom. As are you. Oh, okay, so my favourite thing about his model are his whitish blue body markings. Watch these as the scene goes on, because they fade in and out. See these whitey blue spirit things flowing through the temple? That's what his markings are made of. The spirits of the dead literally flow through his temple and his body and power him. Anyway, and don't forget, Bwom is supposedly older than the entire troll race, but he looks like a troll. He chooses to look like that because he wants trolls to recognize themselves in him, a reminder of where they all end up.
I need your aid. I see.
And I love his quality of movement, the way he flops around like Jack Skellington when he's being cheeky, but then has very direct and precise moments too when he's being serious. He's basically like the genie from Aladdin if the genie wanted to kill everything and keep their souls. And that's not me being stupid, his lithe movements are a direct contrast to this square, stout king who has clearly never missed leg day and whose pride is about to damn him and his line for all eternity. Because then the deal is made.
No, I need more than just your word.
Because this is how lowers work. They will help you, but they all demand a price to be paid. And actually, the questing around Zandalar did a really good job of setting this up, with Gonk and Paku vying for your affections over the other. And obviously, you know, you chose Gonk because Paku is so useless that you'd even choose a lower called Gonk over her, but I digress. This isn't really a negotiation. Bwonsamdi knows why Rastakhan is here. He knows what his price is, and Rastakhan knows it too. There is no haggling going on here. Bwonsamdi is just enjoying himself, toying with his food before he eats it. But even then, he can't help his eyes glowing a little harder when he hears the king offer him exactly what he wants.
If you do this for me, I will bind my bloodline to you.
And as Bwonsamdi puts out his hand to shake, you hear his bones rattle, and this extreme upshot of the king makes him already look like a corpse on a slab, or a statue, a memorial of a king, rather than one who is still ruling. And as the very essence of the Lower of Death infuses itself with the King of Zandalar, and I love this transition as Rastakhan is transported back to himself, and as he regards his hand and the deal he has made, the hand of his daughter slips into his. Because this isn't just a bad deal for him, it's a bad deal for her too. And when he says,
Do not worry, my daughter. I have taken care of everything.
well, congratulations, because there is your obligatory Arthas reference this cinematic. That ever-present ghost that it feels runs through all of these animations and cutscenes, like the writing through a stick of rock, is here too, because I have taken care of everything, is what Arthas famously says to his father just before he kills him in Lordaeron. So in that case, a child said the words to his father before bestowing death upon him. This time, it's a father saying the words to his child as he bestows death upon her, because he's just promised to serve death, but she has just been promised to serve death too. That's very clever, and I like it. And then we have the attack on Dazal Alor, with the assault on the city in full flow. The Alliance story ends with the defense of a capital, a whole dungeon of it in fact, and so does the Horde story, which sounds like they're the same, doesn't it? But actually, they're really quite different. So our boy Rasta is fighting, although I have to say, I saw very little of that in the actual scenario I just played. And of course, overlooking all of this is the most obviously evil character in the history of WoW, the Prophet Zul. There is no morally grey here. If his good didn't give it away in the first cinematic, if his big baddie echoing laugh doesn't give it away here, then really the biggest warning sign should have been his massive hat. My advice to all troll kings watching this video, okay? If your suspiciously evil seeming advisor is the only other troll in the kingdom who insists on wearing a hat bigger than your massive hat, keep a really close eye on them, okay? Because they've got some ambition. And Zul calls his secret weapon
Rise,
Mythrax, who we didn't manage to stop being summoned in Vol'dun. Quite where Mythrax has been in the meantime, and quite how he got here without anyone noticing, is a very good question, but let's not think about it too much. But please, let's appreciate just how big Mythrax is. Mythrax is going to be a boss in the Uldir raid. Pretty much this whole Zandalar storyline is setting up the events of the Uldir raid, but honestly, don't worry, he's not that big in the raid. In fact, for the longest time on the beta, his model was labelled as Kithix in the files, who is another massive Sethrax, whose body is actually the foundation of the whole city of Zulaman. It's that sheer scale of old god-related things that we talked about before. So yeah, these things are big, but this is ridiculous. He's here to destroy the final seal and release G'huun. So quick background check. Zul thinks that Rastakhan is a weak king, wants to set up a proper troll empire. He saw how the Drakari trolls in Northrend sacrificed their own lower for power. He thought, oh, that's a good idea. What if I sacrifice all our lower to the solvent old god G'huun? He seems pretty powerful. I'm sure that will be fine. There are 3 seals in place holding G'huun captive. The first 2 are already down, and the actual palace of Dazara Law is the 3rd, which Mythrax is here to sort out. And honestly, how are you even supposed to stop him? Well, the answer is, you don't even try, because really the only thing Rastakhan cares about is his own throne, and his main concern is getting rid of the usurper, Zul. So this is where he calls upon the might of Bwonsamdi.
Bwonsamdi! We had a deal! Grant me your power!
And we learn that when you are empowered by the Lower of Death, you can jump really high. Cool jump, bro. And not much else, because this is frankly a much closer fight than you'd expect, considering one is a lower infused Chad King who was ruled for 20 years, survived over 40 assassination attempts, including one from his own wife, and the other is basically just a fortune teller with a big hat. In fact, it isn't until Rastakhan calls on the lower strength again to make his own iron fist that he finally gains the upper hand. And at this point, where Zul and we too know that he is done, we realise it doesn't really matter, because, and I'll say it again, it wasn't Zul that we needed to stop. It's this city-sized old god servant, this one here. In killing Zul, we've achieved absolutely nothing at all, because Mythrax unleashes this huge volley of void energy, which, by the way, looks alarmingly like the stuff that void elves use, because it's the exact same stuff as void elves use, because, you know, what could possibly go wrong with void elves? To destroy the seal and win when Zul says, "Fool." He's absolutely right. Rastakhan is an absolute idiot. And as Zul looks at him with those glowing red eyes, like Azshara and the Naga, like Gul'dan, like Sylvanas, he says,
Long may you reign over your empire of ash.
And he means that the kingdom is going to get reduced to ashes. He's doing baddie talk, but of course we know that this whole royal line is now promised to Bwonsamdi. So it has another meaning as well. Ashes for the Death Lower. And Rastakhan knows that he's right. His pact with the devil has won him back his throne, but it is ultimately hollow because the thing they were trying to stop, G'huun, has not been stopped. And even pushing Zul off the ledge here is a selfish act born out of pure revenge because, again, it just hinders us. We could have got valuable information on how to stop G'huun from a living Zul, but instead now we have to fight a superpowered undead zombie Zul in Uldir. Thanks for that. And help me out, guys. This cool shot here, what's this a reference to? Let me know. And the scene ends with this brilliant line.
Ooh, look at this. Congratulations, Your Majesty. The kingdom is ours.
And the look of horror on the king's face as he realises what he's done. Through his bad decisions, his not listening to his daughter, his trusting the wrong people, and ultimately his pride and selfishness, he has bound his entire line to the Death Lower. This is Bwonsamdi's kingdom now, as much as it is his. It is literally a kingdom of ash. And the regret on his face here is beautiful and in stark contrast to the maternal pride shown by Catherine Proudmoore in the final Alliance cinematic. Has a troll king ever looked more like Waluigi than Rastakhan does at this point? I'm going to say no. And that's not the only contrast, because from a bleak start, the Alliance story saw us save a parent from their bad decisions, defeat the forces rallying against her, save her daughter from a realm of death, and defend their city. Whereas from our triumphant start, the Horde story saw us unable to change a parent's bad decisions and lose the main battle in every zone, see a daughter promised to a realm of death, even though she doesn't know it yet, and also defend a city, but not very well, and who knows for how long. Parallels between the two narratives are obvious and intentional, and I suspect that toing and froing will continue between the factions throughout this expansion. So there are two questions. What happens next? And what does it mean? Well, obviously step 1 is the Uldir raid, where despite how bad everything looks now, because we are invincible badass murder hobos, we do actually manage to defeat Cahoon, although there's no telling what the fallout from that will be. The end of a raid is usually a kicking off point for another big event, so it'll be interesting to see if Blizzard have got any revelations planned for the end of that. But maybe the more important question is, what next for Rastakhan, Bwonsamdi, and Talanji? Why is death and death magic and the realms of death suddenly so important in the narrative, and who is Bwonsamdi's boss? Because you've probably heard all this, but in the revered question line that I haven't played through yet, because come on, give me a break, I've only just got to 120 on Horde, I've been making videos. So instead, here's WoWhead's footage, because we're friends, link below. And as spoiler-free as I can make it, we go looking for a certain person's ashes, and they turn out to be mysteriously missing. Probably because that person is most likely a lower themselves now. But this panics Bwonsamdi, and he says,
"Impossible! The boss ain't gonna like this."
So, before we tackle those other questions, who is Bwonsamdi's boss? It's a fun question, because speculation is fun, but it's also an important question, because whoever his boss is now has a major grip on the leadership of the entire nation of Zandalar. So who are the main contenders? Well, there's the Lich King, because, you know, dead things. But it's definitely not the Lich King, because, well, one, Bwonsamdi is a few thousand years older than the Lich King, but also because they deal in two completely different things. Bwonsamdi is all about actual death. The Lich King prefers to keep things undead. Each one's work directly opposes the other. There's Helya, which is possible, but Helya seems to do the same thing as Bwonsamdi does, but in a slightly different way. They seem to be on the same sort of level. They're the same pay grade. I don't think either one is the other's boss. There's Hakar, the so-called blood god, who loves souls. He loves them. He can't get enough of them. He lives in the Shadowlands. Blizzard have said in a couple of recent interviews that they won't be touching Hakar this expansion, which could, in fairness, be a flat-out lie. Wouldn't be the first time, but does make sense. We're probably all a bit bored of him. It's certainly not the old gods, because I think the way death as a force is building up, and the way Sylvanas is being built up as a representative of it, the way the Void seems afraid of death, I feel like death and death magic will somehow be the way we end up defeating the old gods and the Void Lords in some form. All of this does help explain to me why Vol'jin chose Sylvanas as the next war chief though. The lower whispered to him. As a Darkspear troll, that lower would have been Bwonsamdi, who would love the idea of Sylvanas giving him, say, a whole tree's city's worth of souls to feast on. But no, I get the feeling that Bwonsamdi's boss is someone new. Someone we haven't met yet. Someone who he and Helya and maybe Sylvanas too are all in service of. I can't wait to find out who that could be, and I wouldn't be surprised if there's a post-raid cutscene or cinematic that gives us just a hint, or maybe just the shadow of a hint, like that plant in the cave that spoke to your Shadow Priest Naifu at the end of the Emerald Dream. Whatever happens though, there's bound to be loads more Bwonsamdi, so no one really loses. Result. So with a good solid answer of, I don't know, let's go back to the first question. What about Rastakhan and Talanji? How do they get out of this deal with the Lower of Death? Well, I do like the idea of Talanji having to clear up her father's mess, just like Jaina cleared up her mother's. But like Jaina, I don't think she'll have to do it alone. I think she'll have our help. When we make our own deal with Bwonsamdi in the Nazmir storyline, he says that in return, he expects us to send him 1 million souls, which sounds like his way of saying you're never getting out of this deal. But what's interesting is what he says next. No need to look shocked. I'm not going to do the accent. No need to look shocked. You be pretty capable of doing this. Does he know something we don't? We know he has some sort of future sight, because he knows that Razan is about to die before anyone else does. Now that we've made this deal with him, throughout the course of this expansion, is it possible that we, the player, will actually bring him 1 million souls? That will trigger some catastrophic event that sends 1 million souls Bwonsamdi's way, either because 1 million people die, or maybe there'll be a future raid and one of the bosses holds like 1 million souls within him that we release when we kill it, fulfill our pact to the Deathlower, and basically get him to back off from the Royal Zandalari line, freeing Talanji in the process. Pure speculation, obviously, but you know, speculation is fun. And so that's the opening of BFA, and I have a few thoughts about the narrative. The first is that Blizzard weren't lying. It's better, it's more complex, it's more meaningful, and it's more present than we are used to the storytelling being in WoW, especially at this early stage. The way they set up the story in each zone, the way the events you played through in each zone all fed back into the conclusion of your faction's story, the way that the groundwork for Uldir and the bosses we'll find there has been laid out almost as thoughtfully as the Nighthold, which is high praise, especially for a first raid of an expansion. It's great, and aside from that, I've had really good fun with the war campaigns, sneaking around the other faction's zones and completing a totally separate story and doing island expeditions, which have made me feel in touch with the faction war element. development of the expansion too. Generally, it's all been really satisfying. And it means that maybe for the first time, I actually believe Blizzard when they say how intrinsic that narrative is going to be throughout BFA, which makes me very, very excited indeed. Just one thing though, I mean, I love you, Bwon, I do. Stay away from Jaina, okay? Like, seriously, just don't go near her, even as a joke. It's not her time, okay? Thanks. And Zappy Boy too. Okay, thanks. But what do you guys think? Did the cinematics give the initial story of each continent a satisfying conclusion? What did you think of how the two stories worked in parallel to each other? Do you think one was more successful than the other? Let us know in the comments below. And thanks for joining us today. If you enjoyed this video, don't thank us, thank our patrons who give their actual real life money to make them happen. And they're also very lovely to chat to in our T&E patron community as well, keeping me company on those long leveling sessions, and I appreciate that. Only 13 more characters to go. If you didn't like it, downvote the shit out of it. Remember, my name is Alex Dessert. No, my name is Taliesin from me and Evitel. Until next time, cheerio.